Hi guys, welcome to this video on Act 2, Scene 4 from Macbeth. And in this scene, we see Ross, one of Macbeth's advisors, talking to an old man outside Macbeth's castle. This scene takes place just after Duncan's body has been discovered, at the morning after that night, and strangely, the sun isn't coming up. This scene features ideas around disturbances in nature, linked to Macbeth breaking that natural order, all the things that we've talked about before. And you'll see scenes like this occur at the end of some of the acts. These scenes take place away from the main action and give us an understanding of how people are feeling about the action that aren't directly involved within the play. But before we look at the annotation, let's just have a little listen to the scene.
I can remember well, within the volume of which time I have seen hours dreadful and things strange. But this sore night hath trifled former knowings.
Our good father, thou seest the heavens, as troubled with man's act, threatens his bloody stage. By the clock 'tis day, yet dark night strangles the travelling lamp. Is night's predominance, or the day's shame? That darkness does the face of earth entomb, when living light should kiss it.
'Tis unnatural, even like the deed that's done.
How goes the world, sir? Now.
Why? See you not?
Is known who did this more than bloody deed.
Those that Macbeth hath slain.
Alas the day. What good could they pretend?
They were suborned. Malcolm and Donalbain, the king's two sons, are stolen away and fled, which puts upon them suspicion of the deed.
Against nature, still, thriftless ambition that will raven up thine own life's means. Then 'tis most likely sovereignty will fall upon Macbeth.
He is already named and gone to Scone to be invested.
Where is Duncan's body?
Carried to Coombe Kill, the sacred storehouse of his predecessors and guardian of their bones.
Will you to Scone?
No, Cos. I'll home to Fife.
Well, I will thither.
Well, may you see things well done there. Adieu. Lest our old robes sit easier than our new.
Farewell, father.
God's benison go with you, and with those that would make good of bad and friends of foes.
Okay, so I think it's important noting that within some of the productions of Macbeth, there will be parts that are taken out and parts that are changed. We just saw it then in this scene. There's a big section that Ross and the old man discuss that was removed. We will cover that and it's still valid. Okay, so within these scenes, now these scenes that sometimes come at the end of acts that feature characters away from the plot, so people like the old man and Ross, are used to show people's opinions away from Macbeth's inner circle. They're used to show the opinions of those in the wider world and the impact of the events of the play on people in the wider world. They also act to bookmark the act and offer some form of resolution. So within this scene, Duncan's death is kind of gone over, the results immediately after Duncan's death are kind of gone over, and it bookmarks Duncan's death. And in the next act, we will see the events of the play moving forwards. Okay, just before we continue looking at the annotation, I'd like to just make you aware of this contextual factor behind this scene. So, within this scene, it is alluded to the fact that after Duncan's death, the sun hasn't come up. It's the morning, but it's still dark out. Now, this is a reference to a real-life king of Scotland called King Duff. Now, he was a real king who was murdered just like Duncan. And after his murder, several omens were reported, including an eclipse. So, a real-life eclipse. So, after this king, the sun genuinely didn't come up. This is something that people linked to his murder, and Shakespeare seems to be including this here. People would have possibly been aware of this, And it kind of adds to making the murder of Duncan seem more real and mysterious. So then we have this speech from the old man, who speaks for the common man, who's affected by the situation but not involved in the action. So this is the ordinary people. He describes the knight as sore. He says, "But this sore knight hath trifled former knowings." This talks about the death of Duncan, that he feels particularly sore at the death of Duncan, showing that people loved him, showing that people are shocked by his death. But also, it is a reference to the omens that people are experiencing, the disturbances in nature that people are experiencing. Ross then mentions, "Thou seest the heavens as troubled with man's act, threatens this bloody stage." So the heavens, he's obviously there talking about God, but he may also be talking about fate. If he's talking about God, then that links with the idea of the great chain of being, the divine right of kings, all of that stuff. And if it's to do with fate, it's to do with potentially predestination and the idea that we all don't really have control over our lives. So he's saying here that God is disturbing the world in which man lives, the bloody stage referring to the world in which they are living at this time, and that God is threatening this, that he's threatening to disturb nature. This is also a reference to acting and the theatre, a kind of another fourth wall break. We'll see this from Macbeth a couple of times in this play, where he almost realises that he's not actually a real person, but a character in a story. And all of this builds up the idea that life is not real, that for these people, life and time, in a way, is not real. He then mentions the eclipse. He says, "Dark night strangles the travelling lamp." Think about that metaphor and the use of strangles, that there is pain and death and suffering in the sun not rising. It's also an omen, if there is an eclipse, it's considered an omen. An absence of light would indicate that darkness is upon us, that the evil is upon us. This idea that evil is consuming good. He talks about that darkness does face the earth and tomb when living light should kiss it. So this is the end of the natural order. The darkness is here to stay, and that it's the end of goodness in Scotland. We then have some bird imagery from the old man, and this is the first of the disturbances in nature that he talks about. He says, "A falcon towering in her pride of place was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed." A falcon is a strong and noble bird. It is a predatory bird that is able to take down, rats, badgers, maybe rabbits, that kind of thing. However, a mousing owl is a much, much weaker bird. Now think of the symbolism behind a weaker bird killing a stronger bird. What has just happened in the play? Macbeth, kind of socially and within the hierarchy of the great chain of being, is weaker, lesser than Duncan. But a weaker or lesser character has just killed a stronger or higher character. So this is kind of nature giving away what Macbeth has done. We then have the next disturbance in nature. Ross mentions Duncan's horses, who turned wild in nature and kind of have started attacking each other. It is said they ate each other. Now, again, this is a disturbance in nature on a literal level. Seeing horses eating each other is quite a strange thing to see. But on a metaphorical level, on a symbolical level, Duncan's horses are like his servants. Duncan uses these horses to get him to places. They belong to him, they are his property, and they serve him. Now, these horses are turning wild and becoming violent, just like Macbeth did. And remembering, Macbeth is also one of Duncan's servants. Everyone beneath Duncan is one of his servants. Also, Ross talks about how the horses were as they would make war with mankind. So once more, this is a lower creature, a horse, attacking a higher creature, man, within the great chain of being. And obviously them eating each other is a truly, truly unnatural act. Just moving on. as we progress, we need to think a little bit about how is the attitude towards treason developed within this scene. Okay, so Macduff comes in and has a conversation with Ross about who has been found guilty, about what they think has actually happened, and Ross mentions the murder, calling it, again, a bloody deed linked with the unnatural, and also attitude towards treachery. It's more than bloody. The traitors, the people that did it, are truly evil, very violent people. At this point in the play, Macduff kind of sides with Macbeth's story. It says those that Macbeth hath slain, showing that he believes Macbeth. He believes that the gods were the people that killed Duncan. Ross then goes on to discuss ambition, and in particular, the hollowness of ambition. When Macduff relates to him the idea that maybe Donalbain and Malcolm were the people that put the gods up to it, Ross says, "Gainst nature still, thriftless ambition that will raven up thine own life's means." This is him saying that ambition can ruin your life, particularly if it is thriftless, if it is wasteful ambition. If you're trying to achieve something relatively minor with very, very high stakes and it all goes wrong, then was it worth trying to do in the first place? And this is definitely the case if it was Malcolm. Malcolm has been named the heir to the throne to Duncan. If he were to try to just cut Duncan's life short by a few years and then be found out, he will lose everything. However, this also applies to Macbeth. Macbeth, he'd just been given a new title, people really liked him. Was it really worth sacrificing what would have been a very comfortable, good life for this bit of extra power in becoming king? And I think that by making it applicable to both situations, Shakespeare is exploring the idea that all treason is the same. That whether you are committing treason to try to gain a little bit of power, or whether you're committing treason to try to gain a lot of power, it's all going to be hollow. You're going to be found out in the end, and then you will lose everything. Ross then talks about the sovereignty will fall upon Macbeth, the idea that Macbeth will become king. This backs up the prophecy. This shows the final prophecy of the witches has come true. Now, Macduff sets himself up once more as against Macbeth here. When Ross asks him if he's going to Scone to see Macbeth crowned, Macduff says, "No, cousin, I'll to Fife." This is the idea that he won't go with Macbeth. He's not going to go there and be part of this sham crowning. Also, maybe it talks about the suspicions that he feels from Macbeth. Maybe he's thinking secretly that Macbeth might have had more to do with this than he's letting on. It also foreshadows the idea that Macduff is going to be opposed to Macbeth, sitting in a different castle, ready to start a war with him. Okay, then Macduff makes a reference about clothing, remembering that clothing is a big motif within this play, and remembering that clothes are used to represent power or a lack of power, and status or a lack of status. So Macduff says, "Well, may you see things well done there, adieu, lest our old robes sit easier than our new." And what he's saying here is that he worries that the new robe, i.e. Macbeth, the new person in the robes, the new person in power, won't be as comfortable as the old, i.e. Duncan, lest our old robes sit easier than our new. And I think that this talks about him once more suspecting Macbeth, once more knowing that Macbeth is going to be a violent king. Think about the contrast between Macbeth's character and Duncan's character. Macbeth is cunning, shrewd, violent fighter. Duncan, kind of sweet, soft, old, generous king. So Macduff is seeing that dark days are ahead. And I think he sees that in the omens as well. The belief that nature being so disrupted is an indication that dark and terrible things are going to happen in the future. It's also worth pointing out that Macduff ends on a heroic couplet, trying to finish the scene. Then the old man presents some final juxtaposing ideas that link with all of the equivocation that we've looked at so far. He said, God's benison go with you and with those that would make good of bad and friends of foes. So he's saying good things go with you, Macduff and Ross, and with those kind of people that would make good of bad and friends of foes. So people that would be able to find good in a bad situation, and people that would be able to unite and make friends with people that they had previously fought. Now, this is interesting because the final juxtaposing imagery actually juxtaposes Macbeth's time as king. Macbeth is not able to make good of bad. He makes bad of good. And he doesn't make friends of foes. He makes foes of his friends. He turns on people. He kills Banquo, as we'll see in the next couple of scenes. He goes against Macduff. He's not able to unite people. And I think the old man ends on this final piece of equivocation to show what the Scottish people actually want and what the Scottish people actually need. They need a ruler who's going to be able to steer them through difficult times and who's going to be able to unite them as a people. I have to remember what has been a pretty fractured time in which Duncan was trying to quell a civil war. Okay, so that's Act 2, Scene 4. I hope you found it useful, and I'll speak to you all again soon. Bye-bye.